we're at the stage where it's like shit. Like we're looking now at it, and even though it is 5 million, it is a lot of money, or like it's not a lot of money. The problem is that even though each team is losing 5 million, on average, the owners are profiting, but it's those 58% of people, and they're eating losses. They're funding this league. They're not going to continue. 58% of people who will never see the profits are not going to continue.
That panic in his voice, that's not hyperbole. We're watching someone who's done the math realize the WNBA might actually be closer to dissolution than anyone wants to admit. And the reason has nothing to do with the players, the owners, or even Adam Silver. It's about a number most fans have never heard: 58%. Here's what leaked last month. The WNBA's November proposal featured a $12.5 million salary cap per team. Average player salary hits $1 million. Max contracts at $2.5 million. Sounds reasonable, right? The Players Association rejected it immediately. But here's what the coverage missed entirely.
There's a post here where it says here, the WNBA rejects a recent proposal from the WNBA which would give players 30% gross revenues, believed to feature a 10.5 million salary cap, which is lower than initially that they had. And by the way, like, it is one of those things where 10.5 to 12 is 30%. So 12.5 million was like nearly mid 30s. And it says it resulted in 700 million losses over the course of the deal. The union believe that projection is false. Just putting it out there, if it was only 700 millions of losses, this deal will be signed already. And you might be saying, what does that mean?
Let's break down why those numbers matter. That proposed salary cap represents roughly 30 to 35% of gross revenue going to players. Standard professional sports split. The problem isn't the percentage. The problem is what happens to the other 70% when you factor in operating costs. Charter flights alone cost $500,000 per player annually. That's $6 million per team just for travel. Add in the expanded benefits package the union's demanding: maternity leave for non-birthing parents, increased insurance premiums when you're paying players $2.5 million instead of $200,000, replacement player costs when stars take extended leave. The math stops working fast, but every single WNBA team owner would sign this deal tomorrow. And that's the paradox nobody's explaining.
If it was only the owners signing off on this would be signed already. Because you might be saying, oh, WNBA owners don't want to lose money. $700 million of losses. There will be, by the end of this deal, there will be 20 WNBA teams. That is $35 million per WNBA team over the course of, I think, 7 years. That is $5 million a year lost per team, while franchise values are increasing by 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 million a year. Like, every single owner would say yes. The problem is that insert person here, insert investor here that was in 2022, insert NBA owner that has nothing to do with the WNBA here. Insert all of them people here, because at the end of the day, these people they're only in this for profit, and they are sick of eating.
Here's the part that changes everything. $700 million in projected losses over the life of this deal. That number got reported everywhere. ESPN, The Athletic, every WNBA podcast, everyone treated it like it proved the players were being unreasonable. But watch what happens when you actually divide that out. 20 teams by the end of this agreement. 700 million split 20 ways equals 35 million per franchise over 7 years. That's 5 million in annual losses per team. And here's why that number should make every owner jump at this deal. Franchise valuations are increasing by $50 to $100 million per year. The Las Vegas Aces sold for $2 billion in February. The Golden State Valkyries expansion fee was $50 million in 2022. By 2024, Toronto paid $315 million. You're losing $5 million annually, while your asset appreciates by $75 million minimum. That's a $70 million annual profit on paper. So why isn't this deal signed already?
Losses on this league that they can't profit on. Like, they are not going to profit on, they will profit from expansions, but what they're not going to profit from is they're not going to profit from the franchise value. That's what the owners are going to do. That is what the owners are going to do. It's one of those things where there are outside investors who, by the way, own 58% of the league, that with this current deal will never see a cent. And that is where the problem is that the franchise values doesn't matter, because I can guarantee you that even with these numbers, all 13 WNBA owners want the league to go ahead and will be glad to accept, because these numbers are super low. 5 million. 5 million. Like, that is nothing. That is absolutely nothing, lads. That is so little, and people don't realize, again, how little 5 million per team per year is. It is fucking nothing when the franchise values are skyrocketing. However, now
58%. That's the number destroying these negotiations. 58% of WNBA equity is owned by outside investors who have zero connection to the NBA. They're not team owners. They're not Adam Silver's office. They're private equity firms, venture capitalists, and individual investors who bought in during 2022 when the league was raising capital. And here's their problem. They own equity, not franchises. When a team's valuation skyrockets, the owner profits from that appreciation. They can borrow against it, eventually sell it, pass it to their kids. But equity investors in the league itself, they only profit when the league operates in the black or when new expansion fees get distributed. This deal guarantees the league operates at a loss for 7 more years minimum. Those equity holders will never see returns. They can't sell their stake for what it's worth because nobody's buying into guaranteed losses. They're trapped holding paper that bleeds 5 million per team annually with no exit strategy.
Funding league. And that is the situation we're in, is that I don't think people realize how dire straits we're in, is that the 58% might literally dissolve the league. It is better for the 58% to dissolve the league because as long as the league's not profitable, franchise values doesn't matter for them. Literally, it is the fact that they sold money off to investors and they expect those investors like the NBA and those outside investors to continue to fund a loss leader. And people are like, oh, they can write it off as taxes, these billionaire owners. Not everything's a billionaire owner. And by the way, people don't understand, it's like, oh, write it off as taxes. You're still losing the money. You're like, oh yeah, you don't pay tax. And I was like, but there's nothing for it. Like, it's not a play thing for these things, for these teams. Nobody just wants to burn money.
Now watch his face when he realizes what this means. That's not analysis anymore. That's genuine concern about whether this league survives the month. Because here's what leverage the 58% actually has. They can't force the owners to reject the deal, but they can pull their funding. And the second they do that, the league doesn't have operating capital. No outside investment means no way to cover those annual losses while franchise values appreciate. The NBA could step in. Adam Silver could write checks. But there's a limit to how much the NBA is willing to subsidize a league that refuses to structure deals around profitability. We're talking about asking NBA owners to cover potentially $1 billion in losses over the next decade, while WNBA players reject revenue-sharing models that would make the league sustainable. And before anyone says these billionaires can afford it, let's be clear about how corporation tax actually works.
Nobody burns money. Even if it is for taxes, that's not how it works. If you lose 5 million, you don't pay 5 million less in taxes. If you lose 5 million based on corporation tax, you might pay $1 million less in taxes? You're still losing 4 million from your company. Corporation tax, what is corporation tax in States? I know it's only 12.5% here, but we're a tax haven, so shout out corporation tax, baby. Saved me a boatload of money. But yeah, it's one of those things where I don't think people realize just how dire straits the WNBA is in, that we're at a situation now where there is a possibility that they could just say, fuck this, we're done.
You can't just write off losses indefinitely and call it a tax strategy. If your company loses 5 million, you might pay $1 million less in corporate taxes, depending on your rate. You're still down 4 million in actual cash. This isn't a hobby expense. This isn't buying a yacht and depreciating it. This is operating a professional sports league that needs to eventually generate returns for investors. The Players Association keeps pointing to revenue growth. Viewership up 48% in 2024. Caitlin Clark's games averaging 2.4 million viewers. New media deal worth $2.2 billion over 11 years. All true. But revenue growth doesn't matter if costs grow faster. That's the trap in this proposal. It locks in a percentage-based compensation model. When revenue goes up, player salaries automatically increase. When operating costs go up to support a bigger league, those costs increase too. The 70% left over has to cover everything else. And with charter flights, expanded benefits, larger rosters, more staff, that 70% gets eaten immediately. There's no margin for the league to ever become profitable under this structure.
This number, I think every single WNBA owner is absolutely, this is not a big enough number that they will care about, but there is a big but. There is always the chance that those outside investors just say, fuck this, it's not worth it, and will actually want to dissolve the league. And the players need to be really careful, because I think they are getting very close to the line. For people saying, oh, the WNBA are lying about those numbers. It's not about the WNBA, it's not about the owners, it's about the other 58%. Because that 700 million number, when you actually take into account, is nothing. It's about the other 58%. And everyone's complaining about the league, the players versus the league, and it's actually not. It's the other 58% that is going to be that literally have the power to dissolve the league. And the players need to be careful, because there's a very strong chance of that happening.
So here's where we actually are. The players want 30% minimum. The league's probably offering somewhere between 18 and 22% to leave room for profitability. That gap sounds small. It's the difference between the WNBA existing in 2035 or not. Because the real question isn't whether the players deserve more money. They absolutely do. The real question is whether the 58% of outside investors will continue funding a league that structurally cannot reward their investment. And right now, the answer appears to be no. Every report focuses on the players' union and the league office, but those negotiations are almost irrelevant. The 13-team owners would accept these terms tomorrow. They benefit from franchise appreciation regardless of operating losses. It's the silent majority of equity holders who have the actual power here. They own the majority stake. They provide the operating capital, and they're the ones who can dissolve this league by simply walking away. That's not speculation. That's how corporate structures work. Majority equity holders control the board. If 58% of equity decides the investment is unrecoverable, they can force liquidation or restructuring. The NBA can't override that without buying them out completely. And we're talking about potentially billions to acquire that 58% stake at fair market value. Would Adam Silver spend $2 billion buying out private investors to keep the WNBA operating at a loss for another decade? Maybe. Would the NBA's Board of Governors approve that expenditure? That's a much harder sell. The Players Association is betting that the cultural momentum behind women's basketball makes the league too valuable to let fail. They're betting that Caitlin Clark's popularity and Angel Reese's brand power and Paige Buecher's entering the draft creates enough pressure that someone will blink. They might be right. But they're also betting against basic financial math. And they're betting that people who invested for profit will accept permanent losses for cultural impact. That's a dangerous assumption. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. The absolute worst-case scenario isn't a lockout. It's not a shortened season. It's the 58% calling an emergency board meeting and voting to cease operations internally. Liquidate assets, distribute whatever value remains to stakeholders, and walk away. Could that actually happen? There's maybe a 10% chance, but the fact that we're even discussing it shows how precarious these negotiations have become. The players think they're negotiating with Kathy Engelbert and team owners. They're actually negotiating with private equity firms and venture capitalists who have zero emotional attachment to women's basketball and every financial incentive to cut their losses. So when you see reports about the gap between proposals, understand what's really being negotiated. It's not just salary caps and revenue splits, it's whether the people who control 58% of this league believe there's any path to profitability. And right now, based on what's being proposed, that answer is no. The players have until May to figure this out. After that, we're looking at either a lockout or something much worse. And if you think the WNBA is too big to fail, ask yourself who exactly is going to write the checks to keep it alive. Because the people who own the majority stake are telling you right now they're done funding guaranteed losses. That's the real story behind these negotiations. Not what the players are asking for, not what the league is offering, but whether the silent majority who actually controls this league decides it's worth saving at all. And based on the math we just walked through, that's a much closer call than anyone wants to admit.